I don't talk too much about themes. We just dig into the Word and let the Lord speak to us. But there is, I think, a kind of a theme, and I'm going to tell you ahead of time just because I think it will help us as we go forward. If there's a theme to this portion that we're going to be studying, I think it is simply that life is a whole lot more complicated than you think that it is. And that because of life being complicated, and yet God being over all things, sometimes the answers to the questions of life, they're not as easy. They don't present themselves as straightforward, as if it was something simple. One thing affects another thing, which is affecting something else. We need to realize it's wisdom to recognize that we're on earth and God is in heaven, and that God is over all things. And so as those on earth, we have a very limited perspective. And so we'll go into these passages with that in mind, and just here as these men wrestle through some of those very issues, and hopefully it's something that will open our eyes and help us to understand more clearly some of those things. So chapter 11, Job has just got through sharing. I'm not going to go back through it. We're going straight into the passage. And Zophar, the Naamathite, is going to now respond. It's likely he's the next youngest. The oldest would typically speak first, and so now it's his turn. So verse 1, 11:1. Then Zophar the Naamathite answered, "Shall a multitude of words go unanswered, and a talkative man be acquitted?" As we read these different responses to what Job has said, we realize that these men are becoming more and more straightforward to counter what Job is saying, whereas at the beginning they were more gentle. They would not be quite as pointed in bringing out points. Now they're going to become more and more, basically to say their mind and contend with what he's saying. So, shall a multitude of words go unanswered and a talkative man be acquitted? It says to Job, you're saying a lot of things. You're multiplying your words, but just because you have a lot to say doesn't mean that in any way that somehow your words are true. And if they don't hold truth in them, then they should be answered. They need to be dealt with because, yes, it's a multitude, but it doesn't guarantee that in fact it's right. And he adds, and a talkative man be acquitted. No matter how many times you explain it and how many times you validate yourself and why you're at the place where you are or you think what you do, just because you can actually verbalize it in 50 different ways doesn't make it right. And I'm reminded, and again, I want to say this thought, is some of the things that are shared have truth in them, or they are in fact true, and we need to kind of examine things as we go. And in regard to this, there are New Testament passages. You don't need to turn to this, but in James, we understand that. Let me just read the passage. It says, "This you know, my beloved brethren, but everyone must be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. For the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God." So just because you have a lot of words coming out of your mouth, a lot of, again, things that prove your case does not mean that you're acquitted, and your anger in this case doesn't mean that you're right. You might be very somehow offended, but it doesn't necessarily mean that what you're actually arguing is true. So wisdom means be slow to speak, quick to hear, slow to anger. Don't let things get to you where you're going to just, in a sense, fly off the handle and say things that you don't mean. And so Zophar is saying to Job, listen, Job, you're talking a whole lot, but that doesn't mean you're acquitted. That doesn't mean that you're innocent. That you're innocent before God is just that means you've been speaking and talking. Verse 3. Shall your boast silence men, and shall you scoff and none rebuke? Well, a whole other side of it. Some people are very boastful about their views. They're very puffed up in what they say, and they will blast you with it. But Zophar says, listen, that should not silence someone from coming back and saying the truth. And the other side of it is shall you scoff and none rebuke? Evidently, Zophar, a friend of Job's, feels that Job is actually mocking God. I don't think he would probably say that he's mocking God in the sense of, straightforward, just somehow ridiculing God, but from the standpoint of the stance he's taking, the stance that, God, you're wrong, I'm right, I'm innocent, why are you actually allowing these things to happen in my life? He would say that that's scoffing, and that's somehow bringing contempt to the Lord. And he, again, says, listen, shall someone scoff and not actually be rebuked? Both point to the fact that this man thinks that Job should actually be rebuked in this situation because of his talkativeness, lack of wisdom, his boasting, and even scoffing against God, whether he realizes it or not. That's what he's saying. Verse 4. For you have said, my teaching is pure, and I am innocent in your eyes. That's what he's quoting Job actually saying those things to God, and that's true. In one place, I think it's chapter 6, verse 10, Job says, listen, one thing I have confidence is that I haven't hidden your words, that I'm actually pure in the teaching that I'm still offering, and that I'm holding on to what I know of you and what you've taught and what you've taught me. So my teaching is pure. The other is I'm innocent in your eyes. In chapter 10, verse 7, it says, Job is speaking, according to your knowledge, I am indeed not guilty, yet there is no deliverance from your hands. So he has actually said to God directly, you know that I am not guilty. I am, in fact, innocent. And so Zophar is actually quoting him, and in fact, in saying these very things. For you have said, my teaching is pure, and I am innocent in your eyes. Verse 5, but would that God might speak and open his lips against you. You're talking a lot, but that God would actually say something, because what he would say is something that would be against you. Your assessment isn't right. And Job, you're saying these things, but it's just a multitude of words, and then you need to listen to what God is saying, because if he was actually going to speak to you right now, he would not agree with you. Verse 6, and show you the secrets of wisdom. For sound wisdom has two sides. Know then that God forgets a part of your iniquity. Now, he's been coming against Job, but now he actually gives a little bit of content, okay? And he wants to explain himself. And the first thing he says is all right, you need to understand something, that God is in control of all the secrets of wisdom. What he's basically saying is the secrets of wisdom are there in the Lord's hand and his perspective, and you don't know it all. So for you to come to these conclusions when God is who God is and has all wisdom, you're out of line. That's what makes it a mockery or scoffing. You're out of line, Job. And then he says this interesting term here, or explanation, for sound wisdom has two sides. That's what New American Standard says. Literally, it says, for sound wisdom is double. So what does he mean by that? Sound wisdom is double. And as that two sides, or that being double, know then that God forgets a part of your iniquity. So what Zophar, I think, is saying is listen, there are two sides to things. And I'll bring it into terminology that I understand anyway, and that is that, there are balances. There's balances in truth. We've talked about this before. There are tensions. So like, for example, a guitar string has to actually have two sides pulling, in a sense, two different directions for it to actually bring a good sound. And that always has to be that way. And the balance needs to always be in the middle, or somehow it's gone to an extreme. Maybe he's saying that. And I've said, if he is saying that, he's true. He's right. But he then says this, know then that God forgets a part of your iniquity. So if I understand the argument here, Zophar is saying, listen, God's is ultimately wise. He's beyond you. There are balances in truth, and you're only seeing one side of it. Actually, the only reason why you don't see your own sin is because God forgets part of your sin. And so you can't see it because God has forgotten it. But it's actually something that is there, and you need to realize it is there so that, in fact, you could begin to humble yourself and repent of where you're at. You're just blinded to the ways that you are off. Continue, verse 7. Can you discover the depths of God? Oh, what's the answer to that question? No. You can't discover the depths of God. So is he right? Yes, he's right. You can't discover the depths of God. Can you discover the limits of the Almighty? Even that word limits, I don't know what your translation, but that word limits, is there any limitation to God? But can you discover potential limits of the Almighty? Again, the point being, which, you know what? You're pretty puny, Job, and your understanding is so small, how could you ever come to the conclusion that God does not see things in the right way and that you're innocent and that this was all brought upon you in a wrong fashion? How can that be? You need to have a more broad view of who God is. Verse 8. Speaking of the limits of the Almighty, they are as high as the heavens, or the heights of the heavens. And because of that, what can you do? Just look at how small you are. Go up in, I'm not saying this to Job, but to us, go up in an airplane. Go up to 30,000 feet. And try to even see a person on the ground. You can't. And that's not the height of heaven. And how insignificant we are. And it just informs us that we are on our end, we're very limited. God's not limited, but we are. What can you do? So that's the height of heaven. On the other side of it is the deeper than Sheol. What can you know? If you go from the depths of the pit, where those fallen angels are that God is holding captive until the end of time, clear up to the heaven of heavens in the Holy of Holies, and you realize the distance and what it is that is the magnitude of what God is and what he has created, then what can you know? You can't know very much. Verse 9, its measure is longer than the earth and broader than the sea. Now, Zophar, he didn't have the advantage of realizing the earth is not very big, right? And the ocean is pretty, it's nothing compared to the universe. So we have even a greater way to understand how awesome our God is and how beyond us he is. Verse 10, if he, God, passes by or shuts up or calls an assembly, who can restrain him? If he wants to do something, he's going to do it. If he doesn't, he won't. And who's going to come against that? No one. For he knows false men and he sees iniquity without investigating. He doesn't even have to investigate it. Well, let me kind of put things back together again and see if this is true. He knows everything. You know? He's omniscient. He understands it all. His understanding, according to Isaiah, it's inscrutable. So he doesn't need to investigate. He knows false men, and he knows their iniquity. And again, the implication is he knows yours, Job. He knows you. And then he says this, an idiot will become intelligent when the foal of a wild donkey is born a man. Now, if you want to put that on a t-shirt, I want you to go ahead and do that. Walk around and see what people say to you, you know? What? You probably get people that even ask, what are you talking about here? But so, all right, let's break it down a little bit. Literally, an idiot, as my translation actually translates it, is a hollow man. A hollow man. Doesn't have a lot inside, okay? Yeah, could think of some analogies, but I won't. A hollow man will become intelligent when the foal of a wild donkey is born a man. All right, so you got to compare. And I want to say verse 11 and verse 12 are two sides of wisdom. It's the double he was talking about. On the one hand, God knows false men. They don't get away with anything. He sees their iniquity without investigating, and it is, in fact, in his light no matter what. So nobody gets away with anything. That's the one side. And there are, in fact, false men. False men. They're deceivers, and God knows it. That's on the one side. Okay? And they're gonna be judged. On the other side, there are those who are hollow men, maybe even someone who was a false man at one point, and that hollow man will in fact become intelligent. And when would that happen? When the foal of a wild donkey is born a man. I think what he's saying is well, we know in our world what is referred to as a donkey, that's another word, okay? and basically, I think what he's saying is yes, God's going to judge those who are deceitful and false, and judgment will fall upon them. But also, God has the capability to take somebody who came from that environment, who in fact was a hollow man, and change him in an instant, and actually take from the foal of a wild donkey and make a man out of him. So I think we're probably in this room. There's probably that, we were brought from the kingdom of darkness to the kingdom of God's beloved Son. We were in our sin. We were controlled by our sin, but God changed us. He transformed us and made us children of God. There's examples right there. But in the Old Testament, do you remember Hezekiah? Was Hezekiah a godly king or an evil king? He was a godly king. Who was his son? Manasseh, who was one of the most wicked kings there was. So even though he came from Hezekiah, who was godly, the very next generation, here he has a son, and he is wicked, so wicked. So it goes that way, but it also goes, I hope I get this right. Yeah, I'm right. Okay, Hezekiah had a son named Ammon, who was, am I getting that right? No, sorry. Manasseh had a son named Ammon. Manasseh had a son named Ammon, and Ammon was as wicked as Manasseh was. Do you know who the son of Ammon was? Josiah. So there you got a wicked one, a wicked king, and from that wicked king, from that donkey, came someone actually righteous who stood for the Lord, Josiah. So what he's saying is God can do anything he wants to do. God is over all things. He has purposes, and things are much greater than what you would ever imagine. And he's saying that to Job. You don't know everything, Job. And there's an implication in there. You know what? You might think that you not have sin, but God sees your sin because he can see it even if he doesn't investigate it. And hey, how about, why don't you become one of those men who turn around? That's what he's saying. Verse 13. If you would direct your heart right and spread out your hand to him, if iniquity is in your hand, put it far away, and don't let wickedness dwell in your tents. Listen, you just need to get right with God. Let's not talk about these things anymore, all this talkative stuff of what you think you're innocent. Repent. Have a right heart with God, and God can make the best of that situation and change you. Isn't it, just pause for a minute, isn't it true that interwoven in here, in fact, is truth? It's not like it's all just wasted things that he's saying. There is truth to what he's saying. But even to use his own analogy, we're going to see that he's only, in fact, seeing one side of things, maybe two, I don't know. But it's even more complicated than that. There's more to it than that. But let's keep going. Verse 15. Then indeed you would lift up your face without defect. You would be steadfast and not fear if you get right with God. For you would forget your trouble as waters that have passed by, you would remember it. Well, what do you mean? We say, that's water under the bridge. He's saying, listen, if you repent, your life is going to change. You're going to forget your trouble, and you're going to remember your trouble like water under a bridge. You don't remember what the water under the bridge was like. It just goes by. And that's what he says, is that's how it's going to be. And you're going to be delivered in that sense. Verse 17, your life would be brighter than noonday. Darkness would be like the morning. When you would trust, then you would trust because there is hope, and you would look around and rest securely. Even though he was giving a rebuke, he's bringing encouragement. If Job will do this, then these things will take place. Verse 19, you would lie down and none would disturb you, and many would entreat your favor. People would come back to you again. You would have relationships again. But if you don't change, if your heart doesn't become right, then there's another alternative. Verse 20, but the eyes of the wicked will fail, and there will be no escape for them, and their hope is to breathe their last. And Job has actually said at some points that he's about ready to expire, that it would be better for him in Sheol than experiencing some of the things he's experiencing. And so he's, in a sense, reminding him of that too. And if he doesn't actually turn, that his greatest hope will be to breathe his last. So that's Zophar's contribution. Chapter 12, verse 1. Then Job responded, truly then you are the people, and with you wisdom will die. That's not an encouraging statement. What he's saying is listen, all of you, these things that you're saying, if this is the height of your wisdom, wisdom is about ready to just perish. Because there's not much to what you're really saying. Verse 3, but I have intelligence as well as you. I'm not inferior to you. And who does not know such things as these? So look at that. Job is not saying that what Zophar is saying is wrong. He's acknowledging, yes, these things are true, but in fact, they are things that are superficial. And if this is the height of your wisdom, then your wisdom is going to actually just fail because it doesn't touch the higher or deeper things that need to be touched. Then he makes a comment, verse 4, I am a joke to my friends, the one who called on God, and he answered him. The just and blameless man is a joke. You know, he's saying, listen, what they're really saying about me is that, my claim and even my reputation that I called on God and he answered me, that I have a relationship with God, you know what? That's just nonsense. And they make a joke of me and the fact of justice in my life or blamelessness, it's just all a big joke. And so Job is offended at the fact that they continually are saying of him that these claims that he's making are not true, and particularly the claim that he makes that actually he can actually call out to God and have God answer him. And I think we can relate with that. I don't know if you've shared your relationship with God with the other people. I mean, it's one thing to tell other people that you're a Christian. It's another thing to actually tell people that you know him, you know God. In that kind of terminology, I really, I sought God and God revealed himself to me. At that point, you're at risk of being mocked and seen as a joke because you're claiming to actually have a direct relationship with the most awesome being in the universe that created everyone, who's over all things. And you're saying that you had a conversation with him? I would just say this. I hope you have a conversation with him, because that's the beauty of having fellowship with the living God, because his Spirit is in you and now you're a child of God. It shouldn't be somehow a vague kind of relationship that somehow you're aware of what God is like, but you don't know him. Knowing him is what transforms your life. And so we realize that when we claim that, we're claiming something that the world, really? But I say, that's our testimony. And when you're sincere and genuine and you actually give a description of what God has done in your life, that's powerful. You open eyes when you actually express the intimacy between you and the Lord, and that you can actually have a conversation with him. So Job says, my friends think it's a joke, though. Verse 5. Now watch this verse. He who is at ease holds calamity in contempt. And, as prepared for those whose feet slip. I'm going to read it again. He who is at ease holds calamity in contempt, as prepared for those whose feet slip. The first part, I think, potentially, whereas the other thing we talked about probably wouldn't work, that might work on a t-shirt. But I think people would have to think about it for a minute. And I think it so relates to things today. So let's break it down. He says, first of all, he who is at ease. Job is obviously referring to those friends who are sitting there with him, talking with him, who are not in the affliction that he's in. They're not in a suffering situation. They're just commenting on it, right? And so their life hasn't been turned upside down. They haven't lost their family. They haven't lost their health. They haven't lost, in a sense, the reputation. They haven't lost any of those things. And so in one sense, even though they're there with him, and it's good that they are, they're at ease. So he says, he who is at ease holds calamity in contempt. So you think about this. Let's say in these terms, okay, if things are very comfortable for you and not much really happening in your life that's difficult, you're likely to stand back and look at other situations where calamity took place, and in your ease, you'll hold calamity in contempt. Another way, contempt doesn't register in my mind, so I looked it up. It means disrespect or disdain. So let me say it another way. What Job is alluding to is that if somebody goes through calamity, we should actually be respectful of what they went through. And we shouldn't disdain it. We shouldn't, in a sense, look down on it. And specifically, the last part of verse 5, as prepared for those whose feet slip. That means, well, I'm not going to say it out loud, but I think he's probably going through that because he's not right with God. He's going through that because he made some wrong choices. He didn't handle his life right. That's why he's going through that. And you know what? We're, said this recently, I'll say it again. We're living in a vicarious way. We're in a sense, standing back and coming to judgment calls of why that actually happened to that person. And we'll speak into the situation, but we're not in it at all. Vicarious, I looked it up, means experienced or realized through imaginative or sympathetic participation in the experience of another. So what Job is saying is, you know, you guys are at ease. And you're all ready to make judgment calls about my life. But you know what? You hold calamity in contempt. You disdain it because you're so comfortable you can't understand the hardship that somebody else experiences. And just the fact that the calamity is happening means that there are things going on there that you should respect just because they are happening, because God is over all things and nothing escapes his understanding and even his doing. So, a couple verses. Let me just say it. I wrote this down. Individuals like that who are at ease, they have a world of ease, but it's unreality. Because they look from afar and they don't let the other things touch their own lives. And because, you know, if you or I actually do speak into somebody else's life and we say, oh boy, that's horrible, and we make a judgment call, you know what? You can actually make any judgment call you want, and you know what? There's no repercussions because you're not involved. It's all in your head because you're not actually there in the midst of it. Now, let me just say the other side. The other side is when God actually leads you into somebody's life to minister to them when they are going through difficult times, that you don't take it lightly, what they're going through, that you realize there are purposes, but you trust in God to even give a word to help that person go through whatever it is. So a couple verses. Go with me to the book of James, James chapter 4. James is almost to the end of the Bible. You're not quite that far, but you're getting there. James 4, verse 11. James 4:11 says this. Do not speak against one another, brethren. He who speaks against a brother or judges his brother speaks against the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you're not a doer of the law, but a judge of it. The point is, it's never appropriate to judge somebody else. Because you're not the lawgiver. You're not their judge. God's their judge. And it also brings up this point, if you judge someone else, you aren't necessarily a doer of what it is that you're saying that they should do. And then he adds verse 12, there is only one lawgiver and judge, the one who is able to save and destroy. But who are you to judge your neighbor? So that's one side. Now, I want you to turn to Matthew 23. These friends of Job, they knew some things that were in fact true. And they had a perspective, but they were at ease, and they were actually making these judgments about Job and about his calamity and why it happened. And Job is saying that you are not respectful of what calamity goes on, and because of that, you're coming up with things that are not only not true, but they actually not really attached to reality. So I believe that a good illustration of that kind of thing is Jesus with the Pharisees. Look at Matthew 23. Did I tell you the chapter already? Yes, Matthew 23, verse 1. Then Jesus spoke to the crowds and to his disciples, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees have seated themselves in the chair of Moses. Now, I would imagine the chair of Moses was probably very comfortable. What I mean by that is that if you put yourself in that place where you are the distributor of law, but it didn't necessarily have to impact you at all, it'd be probably a pretty comfortable place. You kind of be a little bit higher than everybody else. Okay? Seated themselves in the chair of Moses, therefore all that they tell you, do and observe. But don't do according to their deeds, for they say things and they don't do them. Hey, do what they tell you to do, because you know what? Intellectually, they know by assent what's right and wrong. But don't do what they do, because there's nothing in their life that's actually following it themselves, because they're not even in reality of the truth. Verse 4. They tie up heavy burdens and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves are unwilling to move them with as much as a finger. You can't read these words, at least I can't, without being convicted, because there's times where I will actually look at somebody else's life and I'll make a judgment call. I mean, listen, just to have advice does not necessarily mean a judgment call. What we're talking about here is when you detach yourself from another person's circumstances, and then you lay on them what you think that they should be doing, with not even a finger to necessarily make anything different. And it is just the way that it is. That's hypocrisy. Jump down to verse 6. They love the place of honor at banquets and the chief seats in the synagogues, and respectful greetings in the marketplaces, and being called rabbi by men. You know, just beginning to have this kind of higher exalted view of yourself than you should have. Verse 13. But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you shut off the kingdom of heaven from people, for you don't enter in yourselves, nor do you allow those who are entering to go in. It's not something that really demonstrates love. It demonstrates a standard that gets laid on different individuals. And in fact, when that standard is laid there, the person can't live up to it. And then it discourages and it defeats them from wanting to actually reach out to the Lord. Last verse, verse 15. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you travel around on sea and land to make one proselyte, or one person to be converted. And when he becomes one, you make him twice as much a son of hell as yourself. Those are Jesus' words. You know what? Jesus didn't have a lot of compassion on hypocrites. You know why? Because hypocrites were living in a false reality, judging everybody else. And it ended up causing people to miss the gospel, to miss the good news, because it's good news, the grace of God that changes people's lives. Okay, go back to Job. So tie that to this, verse 5 again, chapter 12, verse 5. He who is at ease holds calamity in contempt or in disdain, as prepared for those whose feet slip. They deserved it in a way because they're doing something wrong. And then he says, the tents of the destroyers prosper, and those who provoke God are secure. The tents of the destroyer prosper. I don't know what Job meant by that, but the thing that comes to my mind is, you know what? When we're critical of one another, it's an opportunity for the devil to actually bring destruction in people's lives. Because we are holding someone, in a sense, captive to what we think that they should be doing. We're not respecting what it is that's happening in their lives, and we're not listening to the Lord, and it's an opportunity then for the devil to actually come in and to sow lies into their minds. Yeah, they're right. You are somehow standing condemned before God. Somehow this is a reflection of God letting you have it. And the tents of the destroyers prosper. And those who provoke God are secure. So you'll pull in others who will actually be of that same mindset rather than anybody really wanting to live the life that God wants. It's about talking about others. And then he ends this verse 6. It says in this version, whom God brings into their power. Another way to translate is he who brings God into his hand. Somehow, this perspective of being critical of others is bringing or assuming that you can bring God into your hand and that you're the one who's actually judging the lawgiver. But it, in fact, it's a deceitfulness in your own heart of truly what should happen, and that is all of us should be humble before God. Every one of us. None should have a perspective of ourselves that is puffed up in that way. So are we together? Mm-hmm. You just, that's heavy. It's very heavy. But we need to kind of let it soak in a little bit, because I kind of can't help but believe that there's a smidge of hypocrisy in all of us. There's a smidge. Maybe more than a smidge. I don't know. So we should take it to heart, right? Lord, get rid of our smidges, okay? If that's a word. So we'll let that settle. Then we're going to go to verse 7. Verse 7. But now ask the beasts. So he in a sense, charges them with their hypocrisy and being at ease and so forth. And now he's going to say, listen, it's not that complicated. Talk to the beasts. Now ask the beast and let them teach you, and the birds of heaven and let them tell you. Or speak to the earth and let it teach you, and let the fish of the sea declare to you. Who among all these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? Has done what? The calamity. Right? All you got to do is talk to some birds. Go have a conversation with the earth. What you see is that all of creation expresses God's orchestration and being over everything that is. They would acknowledge that, the bird would say, that worm is there because God actually provides for me. And I don't even need to toil. It's something that God put together. And God actually provides through the complicated way that the existence is. he provides and he has purposes in the midst of it. So ask these different creations and they'll tell you that the hand of the Lord has done this, even allowing calamity, even allowing difficulties, because God's purposes are invested in all of his creation. You say, how do you know all that? Well, in Romans 8, it says that actually all of creation was in fact affected by the curse of men choosing to disobey God and sin coming in the world. God could have let them out of it, but God actually has had them in this curse with all the bad things that happen with the curse. Why? In hope that one day the sons of God will be revealed. That one day, through all of these difficulties that they actually share, that God will use it to show men the desperate state that they're in and that they need God. And even to be a statement that this is not the way it's supposed to be. That we would have hope that God is going to change it. So the hand of the Lord has done this. Verse 10, in whose hand is the life of every living thing and the breath of all mankind. Does not the ear test words and the palate taste its food? Wisdom is with aged men, with long life is understanding. Job is kind of agreeing somewhat what Zophar said, that God is over all things, but he's adding to it and saying, listen, even the calamity has a purpose and a plan, and God is over it all. And the more that you would actually be seasoned in your life, you'll understand these things. You'll begin to test words like you taste food, and you'll be able to have more discernment of how God works. Verse 13. With him, God, are wisdom and might. To him belong counsel and understanding. Behold, he tears down, and it cannot be rebuilt. He imprisons a man, and there can be no release. Behold, he restrains the waters, and they dry up, and he sends them out, and they inundate the earth. With him are strength and sound wisdom, but also the misled and the misleader belong to him. You know, what he's introducing is it's not just the good things, it's even those things that are awry, that they're not the perfect way that God always intended, because God even uses the things that are not the way were intended to fulfill ultimately his plans and his purposes. I'll give you a verse about that in a minute, but let's keep reading. So the misled and the misleader belong to him. He makes counselors walk barefoot and makes fools of judges. You know, does God humble? Does God bring down? Yes. God can just bring somebody to the lowest of low. We saw it with Nebuchadnezzar. Verse 18, he loosens the bond of kings and binds their loins with a girdle. He makes priests walk barefoot and overthrows the secure one. As you read this, I'm thinking about 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and chapter 2. And when it talks about that God actually confounds the wise. He comes against the wisdom of this world. And how does he do it? How does it happen? It happens sometimes in calamities to bring somebody down to a level where they recognize who they really are. He overthrows the secure ones. Verse 20. He deprives the trusted ones of speech and takes away the discernment of the elders. He pours contempt on nobles and loosens the belt of the strong. He reveals mysteries from the darkness and brings the deep darkness into light. He makes the nations great, then destroys them. He enlarges the nations, then leads them away. He deprives of intelligence the chiefs of the earth's people and makes them wander in a pathless waste. They grope in darkness with no light, and he makes them stagger like a drunken man. So let's talk about the United States of America. Let's talk about a lot of things that are going on. Or let's just talk about the world. Is everything lost? Well, we are progressing towards Jesus returning. But you know what? What these verses say is that God's sovereignty is not just over the good things. God's sovereignty is even over the bad things. God's purposes will be done, period. Because that is how great God is. And he will contend with the wisdom of this world. He will bring someone to the end of themselves. He will even bring a nation to the end of itself. But the point is that God is that amazingly awesome that he can be as in control with those things that are objectionable, the calamities that happen. He's just as much in control with those as he is in the most beautiful thing that would ever happen in anybody's life. He's over all things. You can look at this later, but let me read it to you. This is in Proverbs, and it's Proverbs 16. It's not long, but I'm just going to read it to you. By the time I get there, you could have got there. Proverbs 16, verse 1. It says this, "The plans of the heart belong to man, but the answer of the tongue is from the Lord. All the ways of a man are clean in his own sight, but the Lord weighs the motives." I'm being facetious, but that's the problem with God. He doesn't just look at what happens, but he looks at the motives of why they happen. "Commit your works to the Lord, and your plans will be established. The Lord has made everything for its own purpose, even the wicked for the day of evil." And that is God. He's not shocked. I would say he's grieved, but he's not shocked. And he fulfills what his orchestrated plan and purpose is. You see it as you read the gospel and you watch things develop and how the scribes and the Pharisees come against Jesus, and it leads to the fact that he can proclaim his grace in a very meaningful way with the backdrop of their legalism. Things get closer to the end, and it seems like, Herod and Pilate and all of them, they're going to have their way against him. And Judas, one of the 12, betrays him. You could say, it's all for naught. Look what's happening. But God was in control of every single thing. Even to the point of the guy with the pitcher who prepared for the Passover before it all happened. He walked by right when Jesus said he would. God is over everything. Doesn't mean everything is good, but it does mean he's in control and he's faithful. So, I got to finish this. So, I don't remember where I was, so let's try verse 19.
Yeah, you were at the end of 12, starting 13.
I was?
Yeah.
Okay. Time goes fast. All right, verse 13. With him are wisdom and might. To him belong counsel and understanding. Behold, he tears down, and it can't be rebuilt. He imprisons a man, and there could be no release. I think I talked about all that. Yeah. Let's jump down to verse 19. He makes priests walk barefoot and overthrows the secure ones. He deprives the trusted ones of speech and takes away the discernment of the elders. Have you ever had God actually take away what you were going to say? You were prepared for it, and you're going to maybe let somebody have it, and all of a sudden it's gone. You can't even know what you were going to say. Even in that, God is God. Maybe to protect that other person, but he's orchestrating his purposes and plans. Verse 21. He pours contempt on nobles and loosens the belt of the strong. He reveals mysteries from the darkness and brings the deep darkness into the light. He makes the nations great. I read this. Then they destroyed them. He enlarged them. Maybe you needed to hear it again. He makes the nations great, then destroys them. He enlarges the nations, then leads them away. He deprives of intelligence the chiefs of the earth's people and makes them wander in pathless waste. They grope in the darkness with no light, and he makes them stagger like a drunken man. Now, chapter 13, just verse 1 and 2 here. Behold, my eye has seen all this, my ear has heard it and understood it. Then you know, I also know, I am not inferior to you. So his point is, these things are things that Job is aware of, and Job actually upped things to involve even not just the good things, but the bad things, and that God is ultimately the one who will make the decisions of his purposes being done. Just a comment, and we're done. The comment is this, is that Job, right from the start, claimed that they were making a joke of his life because he actually claimed to know God and actually to talk with God. And one of the things that comes out of this is that Job was a whole lot more acquainted with the character of God than they were. And then as we go through the book of Job, we're going to realize that Job himself goes to extremes in his understanding. But one thing is true that continually keeps coming up is that he, because of his own pursuit of the very personal aspect of who God is and him knowing God and having fellowship with God, that is the thing that colored his perspective. That he would always come back to a higher perspective on God than his counselors would. He would always come back to that God, in fact, is a God of love. That God would do what he normally does when he delivers, so why isn't he delivering? I know God, so just give me a chance, God, to talk with you for a minute, because if I could just talk with you for a minute, I know that this would all get resolved. But in their perspective, his friend's perspective, that was something that was actually much, much less, we'll put it that way. It was more of their understanding of what they had been taught than that they actually knew personally. And so when he would make this I'll put it the audacity to say, yes, I am upright and I am innocent, they would say, Job, just admit your sin. It's clear that all these terrible things are happening because you've been sinning. But you know the thing that ultimately got Job through all this? He came back to the fact that God's love for him was unmerited right from the start. That God loved him and that God was faithful to him all of his life and that he knew him personally. When he actually examined all the evidence, he had to absolutely one time after another come to the conclusion, no, I still, and we just saw it, I still believe God's purposes are good. And God is fulfilling ultimately what he wants, even through my calamity. Now, can you say that? If you're a Christian, you've been walking with the Lord, I think God wants you to more and more understand that calamity is not something to fear. That God doesn't take off and let you go through it in a random sort of way, that your calamity is as much in the jurisdiction of God's purposes and plans for your life as the good things. And that you can actually, here's the big one, you can trust him. Can you? See, Job would say, I should be able to trust him. Why is this happening? I trust him. They're saying, you can't know God like that. They're saying God is always this way. And there's this kind of like contention that goes on between them because of this either lack of personal, intimate knowledge or one that's had it, that's going through a very difficult time and a trial. But isn't it the message that Job is trying to say here? Listen, have more respect for calamity. Don't disdain calamity as though it always means somebody did something bad. Understand that God's purposes are higher than that, and God loves us.